Beneath the crimson skies of the frontier, where the wind carried the scent of pine and smoke, and stories were passed from mouth to firelight, a young girl wandered beyond the safe edge of her camp. Her name was Alara, and she had the quiet curiosity of someone born between two worlds, one of tradition and another of wild freedom. That day, she wasn't searching for anything, but what she found would turn her into a legend whispered about for generations. What she found was a cry in the distance, a wounded whimper, the kind that only comes from a creature left behind. Following the sound through thorns and timber, Alara came upon it, a dog from the Apache tribe, its paw caught in a cruel steel trap, blood staining the dry soil beneath it. The dog wasn't just any animal. Its coat carried the ceremonial paint of the elders, and around its neck hung a woven band of sacred beads. Alara knew enough to be afraid, not of the dog, but of what it meant to touch something so sacred. Still, her heart moved faster than her fear. She dropped to her knees and spoke softly in a language not taught, but felt. "I won't hurt you." Her hands bled as she pried the trap open, tears burning in her eyes not from pain, but from the sound the animal made. Not of fear, but of trust. When the dog limped free, it didn't run. It stayed. It watched her. And then, slowly, it placed its muzzle to her chest and let out a breath that felt almost like a prayer. Within moments, the sound of hooves surrounded her. Apache riders emerged from the trees, bows drawn, eyes wide with disbelief. The girl had crossed a line no outsider was meant to cross, and survived. But what happened next wasn't punishment. One of the elders dismounted, walked to the dog, and knelt to examine its wounds. He said nothing at first. Then, with a quiet reverence, he removed the necklace from the animal's neck, a relic worn only by the council, and placed it gently around Alara's. Gasps echoed through the trees. No words, just the weight of something far older than tradition pressing against her heart. In that moment, a girl with no tribe became part of a story no one would ever dare erase. And so began the tale of how a simple act of compassion shattered barriers older than memory, and earned a young girl the honor of something meant only for those who carried the spirit of the tribe itself. What she did wasn't heroic in her eyes, it was instinct. But in the eyes of the Apache, it was something far more sacred, proof that even in a land carved by war and silence, the heart still knows how to speak. Alara didn't fully grasp the weight of what had just happened. Her knees were still sore from the forest floor, and her palms throbbed where the trap had bitten into her skin. But the elder's eyes held a silence that was louder than words, and the necklace on her chest felt like fire, not burning, but awakening something ancient. She stood there, surrounded by men who had seen war, famine, and betrayal, yet they bowed their heads to her as if she carried the wisdom of the mountains. She was just a girl, but in that moment, she became something more. The Apache tribe had always been guarded, for good reason. Generations had passed under the shadow of broken treaties and stolen land. Outsiders were not welcome in sacred spaces, much less granted symbols reserved for bloodlines older than the stars. But what Alara had done that morning had pierced through centuries of pain, not with violence, not with a bargain, but with kindness. And kindness, in a world that had nearly forgotten it, was the most dangerous kind of power. That is why the elders watched her now, not with suspicion, but with awe. They led her into their camp, not as a prisoner, not even as a guest, but as someone the spirits themselves had chosen. The fire was lit. The women brought herbs for her hands. The children stared, their eyes wide, whispering stories that had already begun to twist into legend. The dog, now bandaged and calm, never left her side. It followed her as though it had found its way home. And for the first time in her life, Alara didn't feel like she was on the outside of anything. She belonged to something bigger than herself. But belonging comes with burden, especially in the Old West, where every gift carried a shadow. That night, the elder who had given her the necklace, a man named Tahano, with skin like river stone and a gaze like lightning, sat across from her by the fire. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "What you did today was not small," he said. "You changed a story that has been written for generations. And when you change a story, you must be ready to carry its truth." Alara didn't answer right away. She only looked into the fire and nodded. Tahano placed a hand over her heart, just above the necklace. This is not jewelry. It is memory. It is sacrifice. And now, it is yours to understand. His words didn't feel like a warning. They felt like a door being opened, a quiet invitation to something sacred. Alara didn't know where the path would lead. She only knew she had stepped onto it, barefoot and wide-eyed, and that whatever came next, she would walk forward. Because something inside her had already changed, and there was no going back. The days that followed were unlike anything Alara had ever known. Each morning began before the sun rose, with the rhythm of drums calling the tribe to gather. She was invited to sit among the circle, not to speak, but to listen. She learned that in the old ways, silence was not emptiness. It was wisdom. It was how the elders carried truth without bending it. And so Alara listened to stories of the land, of ancestors who had turned rivers into lifelines and stars into maps. She listened, and the stories began to live inside her. Children followed her everywhere, fascinated not just by the necklace, but by her presence. She told them simple stories of the world outside, of machines that moved without horses, of towns where the sky was hidden by smoke. They laughed and asked if such things were real. But when she described the loneliness of those places, their smiles faded. "You were alone out there?" one child asked. Alara nodded. "But I'm not anymore." In their eyes, she saw something she'd never seen in the outside world, reverence without demand. But not everyone in the tribe welcomed her presence. Some of the older warriors, those who had lost family to the white man's greed, watched her with arms folded and jaws tight. They didn't speak against her, but their silence was cold, a reminder that wounds don't heal just because one stranger showed kindness. One evening, as Alara walked past the horses, one of the warriors, a man named Neshoba, stepped into her path. "That necklace does not make you one of us," he said. His voice was low, but it struck like a whip. Alara didn't argue. She just bowed her head. Tahano witnessed the exchange and approached her after. "Do not fear Neshoba," he said. "His anger is not yours to carry, but neither should you ignore it. The path to trust is not paved with gifts. It is earned with time." Alara felt a knot form in her chest. She didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't want to divide. All she had done was free a wounded animal. But now, she was part of something too big to untangle. And so, she made a vow to herself. She would not speak to be accepted. She would live in a way that made acceptance undeniable. That night, she sat alone by the edge of the forest, her fingers brushing the necklace as if it held answers. The wind moved through the trees like breath, and she closed her eyes. She didn't know what would come next, but somewhere deep in her bones, she understood what the necklace really meant. Not honor, but responsibility. And in that moment, with the stars watching overhead, Alara whispered into the dark, "I will not let this story end in silence." The next morning came with thunder on the horizon, not from the sky, but from horses. A group of traders from the neighboring valley arrived at the edge of the tribe's land, seeking passage and negotiation. They came bearing goods wrapped in cloth and promises wrapped in smiles, but Tahano's eyes narrowed. These men had history, and not the kind that faded. Alara stood beside the council, observing, saying nothing. Yet, even in her silence, the traders watched her with curiosity. One whispered, "Who's the girl wearing the elder's bones?" The wind swallowed the rest of his words. During the negotiations, tensions swelled like storm clouds. The tribe had been betrayed before. Promises of peace often came with poison gifts. Tahano remained calm, but Neshoba's jaw clenched with every sentence spoken. Alara, watching it all unfold, began to feel a weight in her chest. She could see what was coming, not with vision, but with instinct. These men weren't here to barter. They were here to measure the tribe's weakness, and they had already decided that her presence, a girl, a stranger, was a crack in the wall. That night, Tahano asked her to walk with him. They moved quietly through the camp until they reached a sacred hill, one that overlooked the valley and the winding river that had kept their people alive for generations. "You see them as outsiders," he said, "but they see you as something else. A bridge, or a threat. You must decide which." Alara's voice shook as she answered, "I never asked to carry this." Tahano nodded. "None of us do, but the story chooses the vessel. And you were chosen not because you are strong, but because you are willing. The next day, one of the traders was caught stealing sacred herbs from the healing tent. Neshoba was the first to react, dragging the man before the fire with fury in his eyes. The council debated punishment, but tempers flared like dry brush in summer. It was Alara who stepped forward, standing not as a girl, but as someone who had walked through fire. "This is not the way," she said. "If we answer betrayal with rage, we become the story they wrote for us. But if we show strength without cruelty, we write our own." The words fell like stones into still water. Neshoba stared at her, the firelight dancing across his face. And then, slowly, he lowered his blade. Tahano stood, voice steady. "The tribe will not forget what you have done," he said to the trader. "But neither will we forget what she has just shown us." The man was banished. No violence, just the silence of judgment. And Alara, without even realizing it, had just done what warriors twice her age had never dared. She'd spoken into the heart of conflict and brought peace. Not because she had power, but because she refused to wield it like a weapon. Days turned into weeks, and the necklace that once felt too heavy for her chest began to settle like second skin. Alara no longer wandered behind the tribe. She walked among them. She helped mend baskets, gathered roots for medicine, and listened to the old women speak of dreams and omens. In every gesture, she sought not to prove herself, but to serve. And the tribe noticed. Even Neshoba, whose silence had once been laced with judgment, began to nod when he passed her by. Respect, like trust, grew slow, but it grew. One night, as the moon hung full above the camp, a ceremony was called. The fire was larger than usual, the drums deeper. Tahano stood before the tribe with a sacred pipe in hand and called Alara forward. Her feet trembled with each step. She didn't know what this meant, but she felt it. Something ancient was about to be asked of her. Tahano looked at her with eyes that had seen generations rise and fall. "Tonight, we do not name you Apache," he said, "but we name you Keeper of the Moment, because it was your choice that shifted the course of our time." They sang for her, not to praise, but to mark, to inscribe her presence into the memory of the land. The song was soft, made of syllables that rose like smoke, and Alara, though she didn't understand every word, felt them wrap around her like a cloak. In the Old West, names were not given lightly. They were earned through fire, through sorrow, through acts that could not be undone. And now, her name had changed. She had become not just a girl who saved a dog, but a story they would tell long after she was gone. But the next morning, a different kind of story arrived. Riders from a distant settlement brought grim news. A small tribe across the valley had been attacked, their land seized, their children missing. The wind that once carried the scent of smoke now carried fear. Tahano gathered the council. They debated whether to get involved. "We are not warriors anymore," one elder said. "Our tribe is small. Our losses would be great." Silence fell. Then Alara stood. "If we do nothing, we lose more than people. We lose our soul." Her voice didn't shout, it carried. And that made it all the more powerful. Neshoba stepped forward next. "She's right," he said. "We were given peace, not to keep it for ourselves, but to extend it where we can." The decision was made. The tribe would ride at dawn, not for battle, but to bring aid, supplies, medicine, shelter. And, at the center of the group, leading them, was Alara, the keeper of the moment. Not because she had asked for it, but because when the world called, she had answered. The journey across the valley was long, the path winding through canyons where echoes of past battles still lingered in the silence. Alara rode between Neshoba and Tahano, the dog she had saved running faithfully at their side. Every mile carried weight, not just from the supplies they bore, but from a memory of what it meant to respond when others turned away. Along the trail, they passed ruins of old settlements scorched by greed and forgotten by time. No one spoke much. In the West, sometimes silence is how hearts hold on to courage. When they reached the remains of the attacked tribe, what they found stopped even the most hardened among them. The smoke still clung to the air, heavy with sorrow. Children huddled in corners of collapsed shelters, their faces hollow with hunger and fear. A few elders stood like statues, too proud to beg, too broken to hope. Alara dismounted before anyone else and knelt beside a boy no older than 7, gently placing a piece of dried meat in his hand. He didn't speak, just stared, as if unsure whether kindness was real. The tribe worked fast. Neshoba oversaw the construction of temporary shelters. The women began preparing food and herbal remedies. Tahano moved among the wounded, offering words that weren't just prayers, but anchors. And Alara, she listened. She sat with each child, holding their hands, letting them tell their stories or simply cry. One girl clutched her shirt and wouldn't let go, whispering, "They left us. No one came." Alara held her tighter. "But we're here now, and we don't leave our own." That evening, as the fires burned low and the children finally slept, Alara walked the perimeter of the camp with Neshoba. "You've changed," he said quietly. She looked at him, unsure if it was praise or observation. "You lead now," he continued, "and not with words, with your presence, the way Tahano used to." Alara's breath caught. "I'm not ready to lead." Neshoba stopped walking. "No one ever is. The ones who are usually the ones who shouldn't." They stood there for a while, watching the stars climb above the smoke. Later that night, Tahano found her by the edge of the river, her feet in the cold water, hands resting over the necklace. He didn't speak at first, just sat beside her. Then he said, "There's a story the elders tell of a hawk who flew too close to the fire. They say it returned with its wings scorched, but its eyes clearer than any before it. Do you know why?" Alara shook her head. Tahano smiled faintly. "Because only those who pass through fire understand how precious the sky truly is." She didn't reply. She only looked up, and for the first time, felt the weight of the sky on her shoulders. In the days that followed, the camp slowly began to breathe again. Laughter returned, hesitant, fragile, like a bird nesting after a storm. The wounded began to heal, and the broken found purpose in rebuilding. Alara helped wherever she was needed. But more and more, people began to look to her before decisions were made. She felt a happening, the shift. The necklace around her neck was no longer just a relic. It had become a responsibility etched into the way others saw her. Not as a girl, but as a symbol. One afternoon, while gathering herbs near the riverbed, Alara heard a rustle in the trees. She turned, hand reaching instinctively toward the knife at her waist. But it wasn't danger. It was a boy, thin, wild-eyed, no older than 10. He didn't speak. He simply held out something wrapped in cloth. When she opened it, her breath caught. It was another elder's necklace. Old, frayed, nearly falling apart, but sacred nonetheless. "My sister," the boy whispered. She hid it before they took her. Said to give it to someone who'd remember. Tears welled in Alara's eyes. She placed her hand gently on the boy's head. "We'll find her," she said, "and we'll honor her until we do." That night, she stood before the tribe with the second necklace held high. "This is not just a piece of our past," she declared. "It's a promise that we do not forget those taken, that we do not stop searching, that we carry their stories even when their voices are gone." The fire crackled, and every face around her burned with quiet resolve. Later, as the stars returned, Neshoba approached her with a wooden box carved in symbols of protection. Inside was a third necklace, older than the others, its beads worn smooth by time. "It was meant for my daughter," he said, "but she didn't survive the last winter." He handed it to Alara. "Now it belongs to you." She took it with trembling hands. "I don't deserve this." Neshoba smiled, tired and warm. "Neither did I. But we were what others can no longer carry." As dawn broke the next morning, Alara stood at the top of the hill with all three necklaces woven together across her shoulders. Below her, two tribes moved as one, rebuilding, healing, living. She realized something then. She had not been chosen to lead because she was extraordinary. She had been chosen because she saw pain and did not turn away. And in the Old West, where blood often spoke louder than words, that kind of courage was the rarest truth of all. The valley bloomed slowly, like a wound learning scar. The two tribes, once strangers, now bonded by survival and shared loss, worked side by side beneath the sun. They planted together, hunted together, and when they sang around the fire, their voices rose in one rhythm. Alara spent her days moving between them, a thread sewing together broken cloth. She no longer asked what her role was. She lived it. Every time she comforted a crying child, every time she calmed a quarrel, every time she knelt to honor a story not her own. But peace in the West was never a permanent guest. It lived on borrowed time, always shadowed by the hunger of men who saw land as a prize and people as obstacles. One evening, a scout returned with grim news. A militia was riding north, armed and eager, claiming to settle the wild. Their path cut straight through the valley. The council gathered immediately, voices rising in fear and frustration. "We must hide," one said. "We must run," said another. But Alara stood, her voice soft but unshakable. "If we run, they will follow. If we hide, we disappear. But if we stand—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The firelight caught her eyes, and in them, the tribe saw not a girl, but a memory of their own resilience reflected back. Tahano nodded solemnly. "We stand." Neshoba sharpened his blade in silence. The elders prepared the children to move toward the highlands for safety. And Alara, she began gathering the women, the farmers, the healers, not for battle, but for presence. "Let them see who we are," she said, "not with weapons, but with witness." As the riders arrived, dust rising behind them like a storm, they found not warriors, not barricades, but a wall of people standing hand in hand, their eyes steady, unblinking. At the front stood Alara, the necklaces braided across her chest like a banner of memory. The captain of the militia stepped forward, bemused. "You think your silence will stop bullets?" he sneered. Alara didn't flinch. "It already stopped yours. You came expecting war. But there's no enemy here, just people you don't understand. And fear always misreads the unknown." The standoff lasted only minutes, but it felt like lifetimes. Then, slowly, the riders lowered their weapons. One by one, they turned back. There was no glory to be won here. No easy conquest. Just the overwhelming presence of something they couldn't break. Unity. When the dust finally settled, the people exhaled. No blood had been spilled. And yet, something irreversible had happened. Alara had led them through fire, not with fists, but with faith. In that valley, history had bent, not with force, but with grace. In the weeks that followed, the story spread far beyond the mountains. Traders spoke of a girl who wore the elders' beads and stood down an army without drawing steel. Travelers came not with guns, but with offerings, seeds, books, tools, wanting to learn from the people who had defended peace without becoming monsters. The valley, once forgotten, became a place of quiet pilgrimage. And at the center of it all was Alara, still young, still learning, but no longer afraid of the weight she carried. Tahano, growing slower with each passing day, called her one evening to sit beside him beneath the sacred cedar. His breath was shallow, but his voice steady. "You've lived 1,000 stories, child," he said. "But there's one left to tell, your own." Alara bowed her head. "I don't know how to begin it." He smiled. "Then just live it. The beginning will come on its own." That night, he passed peacefully in his sleep, his hands folded over a leather pouch containing one final bead, the last of his line. Alara wove it into the necklace with tears in her eyes. His funeral was unlike any the tribes had ever seen. 2 fires were lit. 2 tribes sang as one. Alara stood not as a mourner, but as a vessel of memory. She didn't cry in front of them. Instead, she spoke of his wisdom, of his warnings, of his belief in stillness. "He didn't give me this necklace to honor me," she said. "He gave it to remind all of you that peace is something we must protect together, every day, in every choice." And in that moment, the fire didn't just warm them. It bound them. After the ceremony, Neshoba approached her quietly. "I've lived most of my life believing pain had no cure," he said. "But you proved me wrong." Alara placed a hand over his. "I didn't heal anything. I just refused to let the wound become the story." He nodded, and in his eyes, she saw something deeper than approval. She saw redemption. The kind that only comes when a man realizes he doesn't have to stay angry forever. As the valley settled once again into peace, Alara found herself walking more often along the riverbanks, not searching for answers, but listening. To the birds, to the trees, to the memory of the dog she had once freed. Everything had started with one act of compassion, one choice. And now, the girl who had once walked alone through the forest had become the guardian of a people, the bearer of a truth too old to name. The necklaces no longer weighed her down. They lifted her. Because they didn't belong to her alone. They belonged to everyone who chose to stand. Seasons passed like breath, warm, then cold, then warm again. The valley thrived, not just in harvest, but in harmony. Tribes that once avoided one another began to trade and break bread together. Children grew up learning stories not just from their own bloodlines, but from neighbors once considered strangers. And though Alara never claimed to be a leader, she became something far greater, a living bridge between the old ways and the future no one had dared to imagine. People didn't follow her out of duty. They followed because they felt seen. She began teaching the children under the elder tree, where Tahano used to sit. She taught them how to listen before they spoke, how to read the wind and feel the change in the soil. But more than that, she taught them that power isn't loud. The greatest strength, she often said, is the strength that protects without being asked. The necklaces she wore were no longer symbols of exception. They were signs that anyone, even a girl with no tribe, could change the course of time if she acted with courage and heart. One afternoon, while walking through the meadow with a group of children, Alara noticed one of the boys hanging back. His head was low, and his hands clenched in a fist. When she asked what was wrong, he pointed his leg, stiff from an old break. "They say I'll never run like the others," he muttered. Alara knelt beside him, removing one of the necklaces and placing it gently around his neck. "Then you'll learn to fly in your own way," she said. "Not all warriors charge. Some stand still, and the world moves around them." That boy would go on to become one of the valley's greatest storytellers, retelling the day a girl saved a dog and was given the honor of memory. He always spoke with tears in his voice, not from sadness, but from reverence, because Alara had given him more than encouragement. She had given him permission to be seen. And in the Old West, where only the bold were remembered, she taught that kindness could be bolder than war. And still, Alara remained humble. She lived in a modest hut by the river, her door always open, her fire always lit. People came to her not just for guidance, but to remember what was possible. And whenever someone asked, "Why you?" she'd simply smile and answer, "Because I didn't look away." In a land forged by conflict, where legends were often drenched in blood, her legend was stitched in silence, mercy, and memory. And in that, she had become something far rarer than a hero. She had become a guardian of peace. Years later, long after the valley had become a haven whispered about in distant towns, a stranger arrived, a lone rider with dust in his hair and sorrow in his eyes. He didn't speak much, but he asked one question again and again. Is it true? Did she really save the tribe's spirit with nothing but kindness? The elders nodded. The children nodded. The old warriors who had once doubted her nodded. They didn't have to tell the story anymore. It lived in the way they walked, the way they treated each other, the way the fire in the village square was always kept burning. The rider eventually found her, older now, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes still sharp as ever. She was weaving beads when he approached. He stood in silence until she looked up. "I thought I was too late," he said. Alara shook her head. "The story is never late. It just waits for the right moment to be heard." He sat beside her, and for hours said nothing. When the sun finally fell behind the hills, he whispered, "The world is loud out there. Cruel." Alara placed a hand over his. "Then let's be the quiet that heals it." When Alara passed, many years later, it wasn't with mourning, but with celebration. The valley didn't cry. They sang. They lit hundreds of fires. They placed the 3 necklaces she had worn on a carved wooden statue at the center of the village. But the real monument wasn't stone or wood. It was in the stories, in the way people treated their neighbors, in how children were taught that a girl once saved a wounded dog and changed everything without raising a single blade. And if you walk through that valley today, you'll hear the wind move softly through the trees, and you might catch it carrying her name. Alara, the keeper of the moment, the girl who gave without asking, who healed without preaching, who stood when standing alone meant everything. She didn't fight the Old West. She rewrote it, with mercy as her ink and legacy as her page. Because in a land where silence often meant death, she proved that silence could also mean life. In a land where power was once defined by gunfire and fear, Alara rewrote the meaning of strength without ever lifting a weapon. Her journey wasn't paved with conquest, but with compassion, and that's what made it unforgettable. She taught that sometimes the most radical act in a brutal world is to choose mercy when others choose war, to step forward when silence feels safer, and to carry stories instead of scars. Her legacy wasn't built on the ground she claimed, but on the hearts she helped awaken. From a moment she freed that wounded dog, she stepped into a storm of history, tradition, and pain, and instead of retreating, she listened. Through fire and fear, she became the voice of those who couldn't speak and the courage for those too tired to stand. In the Old West, where most legends were written in blood, hers was woven with humility, patience, and fierce love. She reminded everyone that you don't have to be born into greatness. You only have to be willing to answer when the moment calls. Her story lives on because it reflects something we all long for: the chance to be seen, to matter, to make a difference in a world that often forgets the quiet ones. Alara's courage wasn't loud, but it was contagious. It moved mountains without shaking the earth. And perhaps the most powerful thing she ever did was refuse to believe that her kindness was too small to change anything. That belief, more than anything, is what turned her into legend. So now, ask yourself, what story are you choosing to live? Are you watching the world and waiting for someone else to make it better? Or are you willing to be the one who stands, even when your voice trembles? Because heroes don't always ride in with thunder. Sometimes they kneel beside the wounded. Sometimes they speak softly. And sometimes, like Alara, they become the change others never saw coming. If this story spoke to you, if it moved something inside you, honor that feeling. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next tale that dares to challenge what we think we know. Like the video if Alara's courage inspired you, and share in the comments what moment in her journey stayed with you the most. Because when we share stories like hers, we don't just keep them alive, we keep hope alive.